Welcome to worship with Eliot Unitarian Chapel. Wherever you're tuning in from, near or far, we are so glad you're here. I am Eliot's lead minister, the Reverend Barbara Gadon, and I hope that this is a service that nurtures your spirit. If you are new to Eliot Chapel, we are an intentional community that welcomes all races, all genders, all sexual orientations. We welcome people of all creeds and beliefs and all economic circumstances. Our vision is to create a just world through vibrant, beloved community. If you would like to learn more about us, learn more about this congregation and connect with us in real time, please look for information at the end of the service. Again, thank you for joining us and welcome.
I prayed for 20 years, but received no answer until I prayed with my legs. Frederick Douglass in his autobiography. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Woyaya. That's hymn 1020 in the Teal hymnal, Singing the Journey. When you pray, move your feet. African proverb and mantra of the late Congressman John Lewis. The Flaming Chalice was designed by an Austrian refugee fleeing Nazi persecution in World War II. It was first used as a sign by the Unitarian Service Committee to refugees, especially Unitarians and Jews from Eastern Europe, to let them know that where it was displayed, they would find protectors. Lighting the Flaming Chalice is now a part of Unitarian Universalist services everywhere, reminding us of our sacred duty to aid the refugees, the persecuted, and to walk with them.
Please join me in singing hymn number 283, The Spacious Firmament on High.
Confirm the time. I'm Steve Mennerick. Every month, Eliot Unitarian Chapel shares our offering with a local organization that helps promote our mission of courageous love and compassionate action. In August, we're sharing our offering with the Kirkwood Area Every Child Promise, or Ketchup for short. Among Eliot's stated goals is to create a more just society, that is, to promote equity. Ketchup was started a few years ago in response to a racial equity report issued to the Kirkwood School District. It's my firm conviction, grounded in science, that if we want to achieve equity in society, it has to start with early childhood, even before kindergarten. And that's just where Ketchup's mission lies. Ketchup engages with our community's youngest learners and their families to make sure every child in the school district gets the start that they need during a critical formative time during those children's development. Ketchup helps with preschool scholarships and with information and assistance about resources in the community. It provides access to Promise Place, which is a clothing and supply closet for young children and their families. And the one thing that I'm probably most excited about is that Ketchup is not standalone, rather it's wraparound. It connects with other wonderful local resources, including Kirk Care, Parents as Teachers, the Kirkwood Public Library, the Magic House, other faith organizations, the school district, businesses in the local community, all to provide a truly holistic support for children and their families. There are instructions for giving on your screen. Please give generously, and thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Bruce MacKenzie, and I am not a minister, but I have been active in Eliot Unitarian Chapel for over 40 years, and I've been an RE teacher. I've served on various committees, just been active. And in that time, I've paid attention to the liturgy, and it has changed quite a lot. Times change, congregations and ministers change. One of the changes I noticed when Reverend Barbara came was that she invited us to pray. Prayer has always had a place in our worship, but to be invited was to me a little different. At the time, I was into yoga, and it seemed sort of yoga-ish, so I was cool with it. I have been thinking about movement this summer, probably because my body is crying out for some. And how that invitation seems an invitation to move a little, not as much as John Lewis's African proverb asks, but a little. It is gently directive and physical. Mention is made of our feet, our eyes, our spine, perhaps our breath. As I say this, it reminds me of my childhood religious upbringing. Maybe some of you can relate. Ours was a genteel home, or so we were told, where such displays as kneeling or bowing the head or positioning the hands in prayer was just not done. No one said papist, but I think that was what was behind it. Prayer was for us all stillness and silence. We didn't even say grace. Very strange thinking of it now, how it was all based on a passage in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus says to go into a closed room, in some translations, a closet, and pray behind a locked door. So, there's some context for what I'm going to say this morning. You could say that being a Unitarian has helped me come out of the closet as far as prayer goes. Here we are, summer of 2020, and as I've been explaining, I'm a little obsessed with movement as a part of, or the whole of, prayer. Movement, getting up and moving around. And I mean physically, of course, but not only physically. When we sing of weary feet on a stony road or of a dance to the end of love, we sing of physical ache and pleasure, but more too. Let me explain how I came to understand that prayer or the journey of the Spirit can be the physical movement and the more too. I don't reject my childhood notions, but wish to expand them a lot. I think that this idea of prayer could be many things or take various forms poked me because with great urgency I joined fellow Kirkwood citizens, teachers, students of all ages, religious folk of many brands, to do one thing, one brilliant sunny morning this past summer, march. And in marching and chanting, to register our disgust and anger that we, the people, had turned away from the right path. We had shut our eyes and stopped our ears to the cries of injustice and brutality and rationalizing. In marching all together, 1,000 here joined with marchers around the world, perhaps millions, all moved by the same cry, the same call. A call to prayer, we might say. A friend of mine wrote that what moved her to act, to march, was reading the transcript of George Floyd's last words. He cried out for his mama, she wrote. My friend said she heard and she understood. She went on, When George Floyd summoned his mother, he called all mothers. That's a powerful call for sure. Lonnie O'Neill, a Black mother and writer for The Undefeated, calls this a sacred invocation. A call to your mother is a prayer to be seen. You can see already that I am broadening my old idea of prayer. Mama, and I can't breathe. Not just placards, but prayers. How so? By marching in such numbers that, whether young and bouncy or tired and shuffling, it becomes a collective movement with righteous purpose to proclaim Black Lives Matter. That's how. Seeing the faces of Kirkwood High School students all around me, marching, it felt like prayer. It warranted an amen every other step. John Lewis made it so much clearer to see marching as prayer. Ours, thankfully, was a quiet, raucous march down Manchester and Guyer and Essex. Not a dangerous march, the march in Selma. It was hot, though. There was police protection, not persecution. Streets were blocked off from traffic. Residents held supportive signs along the route and offered bottles of water. It was prayer, I was sure, one foot in front of the other, in community, and amen for that. Together we expressed outrage and cried for righteousness and justice in equal measure. It begins with our feet, our feet, our feet. When you pray, move your feet. Check. Now, pilgrimages. Different than marches, different in purpose and spirit. Yet a pilgrimage also has that beautiful sense of community and devotion. A different pace or gait, for sure. If you walk a pilgrimage, such as the popular Camino de Santiago de Compostela in northern Spain, the gait is called a saunter. Literally, to the Holy Land. It's a long way, don't rush, saunter. The pilgrimage I have in mind was last spring when 50 of us, from Eliot and our friends, went to Montgomery, Alabama to visit the Legacy Museum and various other sites at the heart of the Civil Rights Movement. Sacred land, akin to Normandy, Gettysburg, Liberty Hall. Pilgrims from all around the nation arrived on buses and in near silence, iPhones turned off, visited the shrines. A bus full of Protestants from eastern Kentucky, another of South Asians, new U.S. citizens, learning about their new land. Relics were on display, a poster advertising a slave auction, a bill of sale, the last earth a lynching victim stood on. It's fitting that we pilgrims arrived by bus. You can't saunter on a bus, but when we see where Rosa Parks was pulled out of her seat and off the bus, and when we see the depot where the Freedom Riders were beaten up, many of us feel closer to their stories and understand how a bus can be a good place to pray. As pilgrims, our gait is quieter than the marchers. Our purpose is to somehow participate in or honor what happened. Our feet move with a quiet reverence. There is gratitude in our faces. When we march, it's different. Our gait is strong, determined, forceful, sometimes reinforcing the rhythm of a chant. Our feet move our prayer along. Now, what about the labyrinth? When we walk it, how does it go? At the beginning of July, I was in New Jersey with my daughter Claire and grandson Jamie. They live in a little town where everything is in walking distance, so one morning we walked over to Revolution Coffee Roaster. While Claire and Jamie were inside, I sat on a bench thinking about the atmosphere in the town and our times. I have friends and relatives scattered around the world. Some are super conscientious. A cousin got her sewing machine out when the pandemic hit and started making masks like a quilting bee. Some are nervous and distraught, wringing their hands. Others seem angry and shake their fists at what they call a hoax. It's a tense time, and I suppose if there's a gait associated with this segment of the spiritual journey, it would be pacing, back and forth, fretful, futile, pacing. It's not a positive word, not the kind of move your feet that lifts up a prayer, but it does affect the spirit. In the middle of my reverie, I looked up. Across the street, in the churchyard of Trinity Episcopal Church, is a labyrinth. I had walked labyrinths before, one at a Catholic retreat center with members of Eliot's board. I knew they could be part of a vague spiritual exercise. I knew of the history of the word, how according to the myth, old Daedalus, the architect, made a structure to contain the monstrous Minotaur under King Minos's palace in Crete. What he designed was called the labyrinth, though it was actually a maze. Mazes are puzzles designed to confuse, full of false leads as you make your way to the center. The labyrinth is not about tricksy stuff. Just follow the path. One way in, just reverse it and come back out the same way. Of course, I cross the street. I anticipate a few minutes of quiet, meditative walking. I anticipate a physical recess from mental pacing. Perhaps the breathing, the focus on each footfall, will release the tension in my neck and shoulders. I walk the labyrinth. I am unhurried. I try to be aware of my breath, my posture. I do not need to peer at anything. I can remove my glasses and still stay on the path. I finish it and am not disappointed. Jamie and Claire join me. For Jamie, it looks like chutes and ladders writ large on a school playground. If all goes according to our plan, you should be seeing some photographs. The first one of the beautiful Chartres Cathedral in France. Inside the cathedral is a famous labyrinth, and you can see that and some people walking it. How the pathway is laid out in marble on the floor. And there is also a schematic of the Chartres labyrinth, and I also have one that I can show you that in case the photo didn't come through, you can see. To me, the first time I saw this schematic, it was in kind of a pinkish hue. It looked a little bit like a cross-section of a brain. But what you might notice is that to get to the center, you have to go on the entire path, every single foot of it. And there are some other things you will notice. Well, I will point out to you as we go on. But I just basically wanted to show you how there's no shortcut. You can see that walking a labyrinth is very different from a march or pilgrimage. You're walking in circles, for one thing. Marches and pilgrimage are very communal and very purposeful. Prayer takes many forms. It is not one thing only. Reverend Krista Thaïs suggested in her sermon last week on surrender that if we are to be grown-ups in our faith, we need to understand that the spiritual journey certainly includes dark places, blind alleys, valleys, steep precipices. It includes pacing. The spirit certainly includes darkness, sorrow, grief, despair. And the prayer that embraces the darkness might well involve sitting quietly, alone, listening, or walking in circles, taking one step at a time. I returned to the labyrinth in the churchyard in New Jersey several times to walk and really to think about what happens here on this path that doesn't occur in physical therapy. Here's what I concluded. First, the path everyone walks takes you close to the center early on, and then directs you to the outer edge. That's the labyrinth's path. What that signifies is a mystery left to the walker. The second thing I concluded was that there are no gentle turns. Every turn is a hairpin. It looks like you're retracing your tracks all the time. A blind person, though, could walk this labyrinth guided by textures. The ancient poet Homer, by reputation a blind poet, might have walked a labyrinth and considered the route when he wrote the first lines of the Odyssey. "Sing to me, muse," he writes, "of the man of twists and turns." For that is what Odysseus' name means, twists and turns. It also seems to be what life is, and what a good story is. And as for stories of spiritual journey, there's Jesus's, a story with its share of twists and turns. Born into grinding filth and poverty, brought to trial because he's a threat to authority, and finally executed on a fly-infested hill among common thieves, and yet, hailed, exalted, crowned a king. The third thing I concluded was that walking a labyrinth is an inward-directed experience. Many labyrinths are in remote spots away from the hustle and bustle of enterprise. There is certainly something to be said for the monastic tradition on the journey, the experience of the retreat. However, the two labyrinth walks most meaningful to me have been islands of peace in a world that the poet says is too much with us, hustle and bustle. One, which I just described in a New Jersey town, the townspeople wearing masks, even on the street, shopkeepers turning people away to allow proper spacing, informal food banks set up on street corners, and signs everywhere protesting government actions toward immigrants and refugees, Black Lives Matter signs, out of business signs up and down the street. Much here to drive one to pacing. I walk the labyrinth in the midst of all that, an island of calm. When I take one step away from the private inward journey, I'm back in traffic. But my gait is a little different, a little less inclined to fall into that nervous pacing. The second labyrinth was in Montgomery, Alabama, in a churchyard like the one in New Jersey, not tucked away. You will find it across from the Doubletree Inn, adjacent to a public sidewalk on a main avenue, a perfect place to refresh after a long pilgrimage. Jennifer and I found it after a long, intense day at the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which is also referred to as the Lynching Memorial. Walking it in the evening light seemed fittingly solemn after the day. It allowed us to breathe and to offer up a private requiem. So that is what I experienced on the labyrinth walk, a quiet mind born of a meditation on the way of my feet, the direction of my path. I would like to conclude by reading a poem by my late wife, Jennifer. Think of it as a benediction. She wrote this at the beginning of her career as a poet, 25 years before the Montgomery pilgrimage, but which I realized recently makes a keen observation about the spiritual journey or prayer, though she does not mention either. The poem is called Root and Leaf and was published in a collection called The Unitarian Universalist Poets. I think we have copies of that book in our library. She appends to the poem these words: "Becoming a UU has encouraged me to value the life spent sincerely questioning, knowing that I may never arrive at some answers." She says this perspective enters her poems as well. I am actually uncomfortable with a tidy resolution. The ending is apt to be paradoxical, ambiguous, or enigmatic. End quote. And if I can add, the quiet mind of the labyrinth walker allows for clarity or stillness. The walker knows the path, its twists and turns. With each step, anxiety fades, and anxiety is the enemy of clarity and stillness. In that stillness, it is possible to hear the enigmas and see paradoxes and new oblique pathways. Well, before I read Root and Leaf, a heads up, there are two allusions in the poem. One classical to the character of Oedipus, who, as a young man, hears a prophecy that he will kill his father, and he leaves town to avoid that. He does not realize the man he thinks is his father is not. The other allusion is to the Apostle Paul, who before he became an apostle or a saint, set out on a road to persecute Christians. Root and Leaf by Jennifer MacKenzie. Each summer day has its garden work, and my task today is to divide the iris. I spade up the matted roots, the pale ringed rhizomes twine and snake, interlocked like puzzle pieces. Each thickened wrist of root unfurls like a bent hand, a fan of leaves, unforeseen after such odd turnings. I brush away the loosened dirt and prize from the twisted mass one plant entire. My fingers trace the swollen detour, root to leaf. A certain man went up toward Thebes so as not to do a great evil. On the road, a stranger picked a fight. At length, he learned that evil, thought left behind, distant as the stars, was at hand. A certain man went up toward Damascus, hastening to do a great evil. On the road, he was struck by blinding light. At length, he saw that good, unsought, was by his hand, far flung as the stars. Here in the garden's midst, a mass of iris. I'm not the gardener to untwist this maze, lay bare and trace the tales of the man who fled evil and did evil, and the man who sped to evil and did good. How grew these tales of roots, straight roots that doubled? Were they God's prodigies, or did they grow true to nature, Most of all, if they grew true, which of these two was the good man? This concludes our service. Amen. Go in peace. And please return for the Zoom coffee hour.
Please join me in singing hymn number 348, Guide My Feet.